While Thor has become a beloved character and member of the Avengers over time, he also is often busy going on his own adventures during his time away from his teammates, and sometimes even having them tag along. Those who aren't as familiar with the mystical and often mythological adventures of Thor, or even all of the in-depth Thor lore included in the Avengers comics, might be surprised to find that Thor has a catalog of rogues all his own. Welcome back, Nerd Squad. Today we're going to be exploring some of the random unknown feuds and antagonists that have come in and out of the hero Thor's life, as we count down the top 10 Thor villains you've never heard of. Prepare to learn something new, and be sure to stick around to the end of this list where I will have some bonus content coming your way. Also, if you love villains as much as I do, make sure you check out one of my recent lists, Top 10 Gender-Bended Supervillains. I am so happy I finally got to create that list for all you nerds. Alright, now let's get counting. Number 10. Apocalypse. While you likely know Apocalypse, who has been in many mutant-themed comics as well as animated series and even an X-Men film, you might not recall the time that Thor and Apocalypse faced one another. That's right, these two have beef, and it actually goes way back. We learned about their first fight in a flashback in Rick Remender's Uncanny Avengers issue number 6. Here we learn that the two came to blows more than 1,000 years in the past, after Apocalypse had learned that Thor would be the one to stop him in the future. Apocalypse tracks down a younger Thor, who is not yet worthy of Mjolnir, and instead wields his axe known as Jarnbjorn. Unsurprisingly, during this first fight, Thor would be defeated by Apocalypse and was forced to retreat. But this would not be the end of their feud for the two enemies, and they would of course come to blows again later on in their lives, as was predicted. Number 9. Mangog. Mangog is a villain who embodies and carries within itself the rage of their entire race, which was destroyed by Odin. We don't really know why Odin and Asgard decided to eliminate this race of beings, but they did. And so Mangog came to existence as the physical manifestation of that race's hatred towards all things Asgardian. This hate obviously extended to Thor. This has prompted the two to clash over the years. Oftentimes Mangog is too strong to be defeated in battle, however the being feeds off of psychic energies, and if one can cut it off from its source of hatred, which fuels Mangog, it could easily be defeated. Number 8. Gladiator. Gladiator always tends to show up to fight Thor in the most random stories. One such story even sees him taking on the all-new Thor, Jane Foster's Thor, when the Shi'ar gods decide they would like to prove their worth by defeating her in the Challenge of the Gods. In order to get her to compete, they decide to send the Imperial Guard, Gladiator included, to kidnap her. The Imperial Guard fought against the Asgardians but were defeated. In the end, Gladiator did decide to team up with Thor to take down the Shi'ar gods, who kinda were taking out their wrath on the Shi'ar people. This led to Quentin Quire becoming the new god of Shi'ar, which is, yeah, pretty random. Random stories like this where Gladiator would be pulled into strange conflicts with Thor, Jane Foster, or Thor Odinson appear to be a recurring thing in the comics. Number 7. Tomorrow Man. Speaking of weird storylines involving conflict between Gladiator and Thor, Archer Zarko was also involved in one such similar conflict. Zarko is known as the Tomorrow Man, an evil scientist from the future who first came into conflict with Thor when he traveled to the past in order to more easily acquire a nuclear bomb. This prompted Thor himself to time travel in order to pursue Tomorrow Man. Later on, Zarko would also recruit Gladiator from an alternate future to fight and defeat Thor, speaking of that feud that those two had previously. Number 6. Ragnarok. For those who cannot see the sometimes dramatic similarities between the superhero genre and soap operas, by the way, this is one of them. Ragnarok is Thor's evil clone. He was created using a strand of Thor's hair that Iron Man had found. Or so Tony claims. I definitely think he was pulling out strands of Thor's hair while he slept, or just pulled some out of his hairbrush super sneakily. But no, the story is he just found a hair of Thor's and decided to keep it, just in case. In case of what, Tony? In case of what? This of course later led to the creation of Ragnarok and the use of him during the events of the First Civil War, when Thor would not join with Iron Man and Stark decided to use this one hair he happened to be saving to create a clone of Thor to basically rally and inspire the troops. Ragnarok would appear to perish at the hands of Hercules, but would later return once more and even join Norman Osborn's Dark Avengers during the events of Dark Reign. Number 5. Curse. Also known as Algem, Curse is one of the strongest dark elves around. He at one point allied himself with Malekith, and while he often lacks the direction, intelligence, and depth to really become a standout villain when it comes to his interactions with the Thunder God, he is still likely one of the more powerful of Thor's villains. Curse only served Malekith for a time, as well as he later found himself betrayed by Malekith, causing him to break ties with the other dark elf. The Beyonder also bolstered Curse's power levels, increasing them using his own cosmic energy, after sensing and being attracted to Curse's intense hatred for Thor. The Beyonder of course just gave him a power boost for funsies, cause well, he's kind of chaotic like that. Number 4. Desak, the Destroyer of Gods. Desak was a villain who originally started out as a pretty kind-hearted and pious man. He became a villain after feeling that the sacrifice of his daughter to his gods had not really been justified. Losing his faith in the gods as his people were attacked, he decided to accept godlike powers that were offered to him, so he could avenge his and people's losses. Desak set out to kill the gods and was predicted to be the one who would also strike down the gods of Olympus in due time. As such, Thor set out to stop Desak before he could arrive, venturing out into space with Hercules and Beta Ray Bill. Number 3. The Enchanters 3. The Enchanters 3 were brothers who were also masterful sorcerers. They each were armed with their own living talisman, which amplifies their magical powers, and their names were Forsung, Brona, and Magnar. Yep, they certainly sound like they could be Thor villains just based on those names. These brothers decided one day that they just wanted to conquer Asgard after running into the warriors and Thor's companions Balder and Sif. When Balder and Sif caught on, they rushed down to Earth to warn Thor of the Enchanters' plot. Thor teams up with his fellow Asgardians, including Odin, and manages to defeat the Enchanters, slaying one of them and trapping the other two in an alternate dimension. It's also later revealed that the brothers actually had a fourth sibling named Enrocked, and following this revelation, we also learn that his formerly trapped brothers are free and have also returned, prompting Thor to once again take on these magical foes. Although having a fourth brother kind of ruins the whole Enchanters 3 name, but I guess because one of them was dead it still works, because now there's still 3? Number 2. Bloodaxe the Executioner. Bloodaxe is a villain who basically gets all of her powers from a mystical Asgardian axe, which grants its user power but also corrupts them. It was once wielded by Scourge the Executioner, and as such is imbued with evil energy that also compels whoever wields it to kill, eventually driving them into an insane bloodlust. Bloodaxe wielded this power to kill low-level criminals indiscriminately, and as such attracted the attention of Thor. Oddly enough, while Jackie Lucas, Bloodaxe's civilian identity, first appeared in the late 80s in the Thor comics, she would not appear as Bloodaxe until more than 50 issues later. She also originally wore Scourge's armor during her first appearance as Bloodaxe, in addition to wielding the enchanted axe itself. Number 1. Quicksand. Quicksand was a pretty random villain who first appeared in Thor issue 392. She was originally a human who was transformed into a sand elemental creature due to a nuclear accident. So basically she's female Sandman. As such, she holds a pretty big grudge against nuclear power, which seems to have been trendy to do in the 80s, as there was also a protest going on at the power plant she attacked at the time that she attacked it. This comic was likely reflecting the opinion of the times, as the Chernobyl disaster would have only happened a couple of years prior to this issue's release. It came out in 1988 and the disaster at Chernobyl happened in 1986. History. People at the time were likely afraid of nuclear reactors and the dangers of having a power plant nearby due to the relatively recent and severe disaster that had happened. Quicksand as such attacks the power plant, blaming nuclear energy for her mutation, when Thor comes along and stops her. Oddly enough, this wouldn't be the last we'd see of Quicksand either in the comics, or even the last time we'd see her fight Thor. Still, she's pretty obscure. Thank you so much for watching, Nerd Squad. What are some of your favorite Thor villains? Which villains have you read in Thor comics that you think are just the most obscure? And which unknown villain would you love to see resurface? Let us know in the comments below. And speaking of comments, it's time to turn to some comments from one of our latest videos, Top 10 Gender-Bended Supervillains. That list I mentioned earlier that you need to check out. YouTube comment responded, Lady Loki, that's just the guy Loki inside Sif's body. Y'all weird as fuh. Except that now Loki can turn into that version whenever he likes. I mean, it's all definitely pretty strange, because I agree, it was just Loki in Sif's body. Technically in mythology though, Loki could probably just shapeshift into whatever he wanted. I mean, remember when he turned into a horse so he could birth a horse baby to give to Odin as a present? And that happened in the comics and in mythology, so Yeah. Weird. Broken Bridge writes, Amanda McKnight question, who do you think should play Storm in the MCU? Wow, there are a lot of amazingly talented actresses out there who I think could make an amazing Storm, but if I had to pick one, I would suggest Ashley Blaine Featherston. I think she could bring a lot of strength and power to this character, and that's all the time we have for comments today. Be sure to comment below for a chance to have your thoughts and feels shouted out in a future list. This has been Top 10 Nerd, and I'm your host Amanda McKnight, reminding you as always to stay nerdy, YouTube.